Sophia and her young son, Oliver, went for a walk in the forest, which had always been their favorite spot. The forest was lush and full of fresh air, and Oliver ran joyfully among the trees while Sophia followed behind, savoring their time together. She had always felt safe in this forest, but today things took a dark turn. At one point, as Sophia stopped to take some photos, Oliver slipped out of her sight. He was curious by nature, and she assumed he had wandered a bit further than usual. Initially, she thought it was just part of their game, but her concern grew with each passing minute. The forest, which had once seemed welcoming, now felt ominous and eerie. As dusk began to fall, Sophia's anxiety heightened. She wandered deeper into the forest, calling for Oliver, until she stumbled upon a strange path leading to an old, dilapidated cabin. Clinging to hope that she might find her son, she ventured inside. The door creaked open, and Sophia entered, her heart pounding. Inside, she saw vague shapes and heard a familiar voice, Oliver's. Rushing into the room, she found her son sitting on the floor, looking bewildered. Next to him stood a tall, gaunt man with a dirty, disheveled appearance and a menacing glare. His clothes were tattered, and he looked as though he had been living in the forest for years. The man's eyes burned with a cruel intensity as he noticed Sophia. Without uttering a word, he blocked her path. His presence alone filled Sophia with such terror that she could barely move. She reached for Oliver, but the man's sinister smile and his silent gesture towards the door made it clear they were not welcome. In desperation, Sophia grabbed Oliver and fled from the cabin. The man shut the door behind them with a creak that echoed in the quiet of the forest. Strange rustlings and scratching sounds emanated from inside as they hurried away. Sophia and Oliver finally found their way back to a familiar trail, escaping the forest in a state of panic. When they looked back, the cabin had vanished, as if it had never been there. Though Oliver was safe, Sophia was haunted by the encounter. The fear and anxiety lingered with her, and she was plagued by nightmares of the man in the Eerie Forest for many nights to come. In a small village lost among the forests, there is a legend about an abandoned house deep in the woods. It is said that at night, laughter from children who once lived there, but mysteriously disappeared many years ago, can be heard coming from the house. The house has long been abandoned, and no one dares to go near it. One day, a curious young man named Leonard decides to check out the house. Having heard stories about ghosts, he wants to see them for himself. In the evening, as the sun sets below the horizon, Leonard grabs a flashlight and ventures into the forest. The path to the house is difficult. He makes his way through thickets and shrubs, hearing the rustling of the forest and the creaking of old trees. Eventually, he reaches the house, which looks dark and derelict. The windows are boarded up, and the roof is covered in moss. Leonard goes inside and finds toys, dusty dolls, wooden cars, and an old stuffed bear. Everything seems to have been left behind many years ago. Suddenly, laughter echoes from the darkness. At first, it is a faint sound, but it gradually grows louder and more unsettling. The toys begin to move on their own. Leonard, terrified, tries to leave the house, but the laughter becomes unbearably loud. He feels invisible hands pulling him towards the center of the room. When he escapes outside, Leonard discovers that the moon has disappeared behind clouds, and the forest is shrouded in dark shadows. He runs away, not looking back, and never returns to that forest again. Luca goes on a solo hike through the forest and discovers an abandoned cabin that seems like the perfect place to spend the night. He decides to settle in, build a small fire in the hearth, and light a lantern to illuminate the interior. At first, everything seems peaceful and quiet, but soon the lantern begins to flicker erratically, and Luca hears strange sounds from outside, like scraping and rustling. Deciding to investigate, he steps outside. The forest is enveloped in a dense, oppressive darkness. The sounds grow increasingly distorted, sometimes resembling eerie whispers. It becomes difficult for him to orient himself, and he begins to panic. He rushes back to the cabin, but the lantern's light dims further and starts to crackle. When the lantern finally goes out completely, Luca finds himself in absolute, suffocating darkness. Shadows on the walls start to shift and distort, taking on strange and threatening shapes. The music, which had been barely audible before, now fills the space with sinister melodies, as if playing in sync with his escalating fear. Whispers grow louder, and Luca can feel his heart pounding furiously. He scrambles to the doors and windows, but they are locked tight, as though some invisible force is keeping him trapped inside. Screams and cries seem to emanate from within the cabin itself, and Luca feels as though something unseen is hunting him. He frantically searches for an escape, but the sensation of being pursued intensifies. The night seems endless, each moment stretching into an eternity. It feels as though dawn will never come. When morning finally breaks, Luca finds the cabin and the forest appearing completely normal, as if nothing had happened. Yet the profound sense of dread and terror lingers, gnawing at him, like the dark presence he experienced. In a forgotten village hidden deep in the Siberian forests, people spoke with dread of the Forest of Darkness. They said it was alive, and that every tree in this forest whispered dark secrets. For ages, the Forest of Darkness had attracted the curious and the brave, eager to uncover its mysteries. However, no one ever returned. It was believed that those who ventured into its depths became part of the forest, their souls lost among the roots and branches. One day, a brave young woman named Elizabeth decided to test the truth of these tales and ventured into the Forest of Darkness. At night, under the cover of a full moon, she crossed the forest's boundary and soon found herself surrounded by ancient trees with long, twisted branches reaching skyward like ghostly hands. Step by step, the forest grew stranger and more ominous. Elizabeth heard whispers, as if someone were calling her name. The sensation was as if she were being pursued. The rustling and crackling underfoot kept her on edge. Shadows on the ground seemed alive, as if an invisible presence was watching her every move. Hours passed, and Elizabeth began to feel disoriented. She turned around and suddenly saw a house before her, a decrepit, half-collapsed structure covered in moss. The house had no doors, only windows that looked like the eye sockets of a dead face staring at her. Elizabeth entered the house, and fear immediately engulfed her. Inside, it was empty, but a strange smell of decay hinted at the presence of people who had once lived there. On the floor, she found an old photograph depicting a group of people. Elizabeth was horrified to recognize the faces of her own long-lost ancestors on the photograph. Her heart pounded as she realized that these people had been drawn into the forest and had become part of it. Suddenly, she understood that this place was not just a forest, but a trap for souls. She saw her reflection in a cracked mirror on the wall, and her face was horrifyingly distorted, unrecognizable. Looking around, Elizabeth noticed that the house began to disappear, as if the forest itself was swallowing it. Elizabeth ran through the room but couldn't find an exit. Suddenly, trees surrounded her, their roots emerging from the ground and grabbing at her legs. She felt her body beginning to merge with the soil, and the forest was pulling her in deeper. Now, when someone seeks a path in the Forest of Darkness, they might notice new faces on the trees, those who once tried to unravel its secrets and became part of the forest. It is said that if one looks closely, they might see Elizabeth's face, frozen in eternal terror among the whispering branches and twisted shadows.